The small apartment on Riverside Boulevard in Sacramento glowed softly under the warm light of Emma's bedroom lamp. It was 8:47 p.m. on a Tuesday evening in March 2023, and the 3-year-old sat cross-legged on her pink unicorn bedspread, her dark curls bouncing as she sang along to her favorite lullaby. Her mother, Sophia, sat beside her, gently brushing her daughter's hair with practiced strokes that had become their nightly ritual. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," Emma sang, her voice high and sweet, slightly off-key in the way only a toddler's voice could be. Sophia smiled, her heart swelling with love as she watched her daughter's innocent joy. These quiet moments were everything to her, a single mother working 2 jobs just to keep their modest 2-bedroom apartment. These precious evening hours with Emma made every struggle worthwhile. "How I wonder what you are," Sophia joined in, her melodic voice harmonizing with her daughter's. Outside their window, the Sacramento evening was cooling down, the March air carrying hints of the spring that was just beginning to bloom across California. Street lights flickered on along the boulevard, and the distant sound of traffic hummed like a familiar lullaby of its own. Then, without warning, the world exploded. The sound of shattering glass erupted from their living room like a bomb detonating. Emma's song cut off mid-note, her brown eyes going wide with terror. Sophia's brush clattered to the floor as she jumped to her feet, her maternal instincts screaming danger. A scream, her own scream, tore from her throat before she could stop it. "Mommy," Emma's voice was tiny, trembling, confused. The little girl clutched her stuffed elephant, Mr. Trunk, against her chest. Heavy footsteps thundered through their apartment, the sound of multiple people moving fast and deliberately. Sophia's mind raced through impossible calculations in milliseconds. The door too far, they'd never make it. The window, 3rd floor, no escape. Her phone charging in the kitchen, unreachable. Her daughter right here, vulnerable, terrified. "Under the bed, baby. Now," Sophia whispered urgently, her hands shaking as she lifted Emma off the mattress. But Emma froze, paralyzed by fear, her small body rigid. "Emma, please." More sounds, drawers being yanked open, items crashing to the floor, unfamiliar voices speaking in harsh, urgent tones. Sophia's protective instincts overrode everything else. She positioned herself between her daughter and the bedroom door, which she'd left slightly ajar. Through that 6-inch gap, Emma could see shadows moving across their hallway walls, distorted and monstrous in the dim light. "Where's the safe? Check the bedroom," a gruff male voice barked. Emma's heart hammered against her tiny. She'd never heard her mother so scared, never felt such raw terror radiating from the person who was supposed to make everything okay. The little girl did the only thing her 3-year-old mind could process. She pressed herself against the wall beside her door, making herself as small as possible, and peeked through the crack. 2 figures moved through her home like dark ghosts, both wearing black hoodies and ski masks that made them look like the monsters from her nightmares. Emma's breathing came in short, rapid gasps. Mr. Trunk fell from her arms, forgotten on the floor. One intruder was tall and thin, moving with jerky, nervous energy. The other was shorter, stockier, and seemed to be in charge. They were ransacking everything. Emma watched as they swept her mother's jewelry box off the dresser in the hallway, the costume pieces scattering like worthless confetti. The shorter one grabbed their television, yanking cords from the wall with brutal efficiency. The taller one stuffed Sophia's laptop into a black backpack. "Anything valuable in here?" the shorter one called out, moving toward Emma's bedroom door. Sophia's breath caught. Emma could see her mother's back pressed against the door, holding it in place, her entire body trembling. "Please," Sophia said, her voice cracking. "Please just take what you want and leave. I have a child." "Shut up," the voice snarled. "Nobody asked you nothing." The taller intruder moved closer to the hallway where Emma could see him more clearly. He was breathing heavily, and sweat had begun to soak through his hoodie. With a sudden, frustrated motion, he reached up and ripped off his ski mask, dragging it over his head to wipe the perspiration from his face. For exactly 3 seconds, 3 seconds that would change everything. Emma saw him completely clearly. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe in his late 20s. Dark hair cut short on the sides, longer on top, stubble on his jaw. But it was his face that Emma's young mind photographed with startling clarity. A jagged scar, white against tan skin, slicing through his left eyebrow like someone had drawn on him with a marker. It made his eyebrow look broken, split into 2 pieces. The young man turned, still holding his mask, still catching his breath. His eyes swept the hallway and landed directly on the crack in Emma's door. For one frozen heartbeat, their gazes locked, the hardened criminal and the terrified 3-year-old. Emma saw his eyes widen in surprise. He saw her tiny face, pale with fear, pressed against the door frame. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but stare at the man with the hurt eyebrow. The moment shattered when the shorter intruder shouted from the living room, "Let's go, grab the cash and move." The tall man quickly yanked his mask back over his face, breaking eye contact with Emma. But it was too late. The image was burned into her memory, the scar, the dark hair, the silver watch on his wrist that caught the hallway light, even the small mole on his neck just below his left ear. Within seconds, both intruders were gone, fleeing through the shattered living room window they'd used to enter. Their footsteps pounded down the fire escape, and then there was silence. Horrible, ringing silence filled only with Sophia's ragged breathing and Emma's quiet whimpers. Sophia burst into the bedroom, scooping Emma into her arms with such force it knocked the air from the little girl's lungs. "Baby, baby, are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Sophia's hands ran over Emma's arms, her legs, checking for injuries, her own body shaking so violently she could barely stand. Emma buried her face in her mother's neck, finally allowing herself to cry. But even through her tears, even as fear coursed through her small body, the image remained crystal clear in her mind. The man with the broken eyebrow who had looked right at her. 15 minutes later, their apartment was flooded with police officers, their radios crackling with codes and updates. Crime scene techs dusted for fingerprints while uniformed officers took Sophia's statement. Emma sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that one of the kind officers had brought from her bed, still clutching Mr. Trunk, who had been retrieved from her bedroom floor. Detective Sarah Mitchell entered the apartment with the weary efficiency of someone who'd seen too many crime scenes. At 43, she'd worked burglaries, assaults, and homicides in Sacramento for 15 years. She'd learned to steel herself against the emotional toll, to maintain professional distance. But when she saw the little girl on the couch, dark curls wild around her tear-stained face, something in Mitchell's armor cracked. She knelt down slowly in front of Emma, making herself eye-level with the child. "Hi there, sweetheart. My name is Sarah. Is it okay if I talk to you for a minute?" Emma looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly, then back at the detective. She nodded slightly. "That must have been really scary what happened tonight," Mitchell said softly. "You were very brave. Did you see anything, sweetheart? Anything at all?" For a long moment, Emma said nothing. Mitchell had expected as much. Trauma often rendered witnesses, especially young children, unable to recall details. She was about to reassure Emma that it was okay, that she didn't have to remember, when the little girl's voice cut through the apartment's chaos. "The bad man had a hurt eyebrow." The words were so quiet that Mitchell almost missed them. "What did you say, honey?" Emma looked directly into the detective's eyes, and Mitchell saw something that made her breath catch, absolute certainty. "The bad man," Emma repeated, her voice slightly stronger. "His eyebrow was broken, like this." She traced a line through her own eyebrow with a tiny finger. Mitchell's pulse quickened. She glanced at Sophia, who looked equally stunned. "Emma, did you see one of the men's faces?" Emma nodded solemnly. He took off his mask. He had a hurt eyebrow and dark hair, and a shiny watch. She held up her wrist to demonstrate. In 15 years of police work, Detective Sarah Mitchell had never had a witness this young provide such specific details. She pulled out her notebook with trembling hands, understanding instinctively that this 3-year-old child might hold the key to solving this case. What she didn't know yet was that Emma's testimony would challenge the entire justice system, create unprecedented legal battles, and ultimately lead to a courtroom moment that would become legendary across California. All because a brave little girl had peeked through a door and remembered the man with the broken eyebrow. The night that changed everything had only just begun. Detective Sarah Mitchell sat in her cluttered office at the Sacramento Police Department headquarters, staring at the case file spread across her desk like pieces of an impossible puzzle. Coffee had gone cold in her mug 2 hours ago, but she barely noticed. The home invasion should have been straightforward. Grab the forensics, interview the victim, file the report, move on to the next case. But 3 words kept echoing in her mind: hurt eyebrow and shiny watch. In her 15 years working cases, Mitchell had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct was screaming that 3-year-old Emma might be their best shot at catching these perpetrators. The problem was, she'd never worked with a witness this young. The legal complications alone made her head spin. Could a toddler's testimony even be admissible in court? Would putting Emma through that process traumatize her further? And most critically, was her memory reliable? Mitchell reached for her phone and dialed Doctor, a child psychologist who'd consulted on dozens of cases involving young victims and witnesses. "I need your expertise on something unusual," Mitchell began, then explained the situation. There was a long pause on the other end. "Sarah, interviewing a 3-year-old requires an extremely delicate approach. Their memories are forming, but they're also highly suggestible. If you lead her at all, defense attorneys will rip the testimony apart." But Doctor's voice shifted, becoming more intrigued. "If she's providing specific, unsolicited details like you described, that's actually a positive indicator. Young children typically can't fabricate complex details they haven't actually seen." 2 days later, Mitchell found herself sitting in a cheerfully decorated room at the Sacramento Children's Advocacy Center, watching through a one-way mirror as Doctor sat cross-legged on the floor with Emma. The room was designed to put children at ease: soft carpet, bins of toys, walls painted in calming blues and greens. Sophia sat in a corner chair, present but not interfering as instructed. Doctor had brought anatomically correct dolls, coloring books, and building blocks, tools designed to help children communicate what words sometimes couldn't express. "Emma, I heard you had some scary visitors at your house," Doctor said gently, her voice warm and unhurried. "Can you tell me about that night? You can use the dolls or draw pictures if that's easier." Emma selected a doll with dark hair and held it up. "This is Mommy," she said simply. Then she picked up 2 male dolls. "These are the bad mans." Mitchell leaned forward, her notepad ready. Doctor was masterful, never asking leading questions, simply letting Emma guide the conversation. The little girl arranged the dolls in a scene that mimicked her bedroom, using blocks to create furniture. "The bad mans broke the window," Emma narrated, making sound effects as she crashed a toy against the blocks. Boom, crash, Mommy screamed like this. She let out a high-pitched shriek that made both women wince. "I was so scared. My tummy hurt." "Where were you when this happened?" Doctor asked. Emma pointed to a gap between 2 blocks. "I was hiding by my door like this." She demonstrated by pressing herself against the wall, making herself small. The gesture was so precise, so clearly practiced, that Mitchell felt her throat tighten. "And what did you see from your hiding spot?" "The bad mans were taking our stuff, our TV, Mommy's pooter." Emma's face scrunched in concentration. "One bad man was tall like Daddy was." Mitchell made a note. Sophia had mentioned Emma's father had passed away 2 years ago in a car accident when Emma was barely 1. The detail about height comparison showed sophisticated observation for a 3-year-old. "Then the tall bad man took off his mask, right here." Emma pointed to a spot in her block arrangement that would have been directly in her line of sight through the door. "He was hot, sweaty." Doctor maintained her neutral expression. What did he look like, Emma? Without hesitation, Emma traced a line through her eyebrow. His eyebrow was broken, like someone cut it, and he had spiky dark hair. And a shiny watch, she grabbed Doctor's wrist to demonstrate, right here, and a little brown spot on his neck. Mitchell's pen froze mid-word. A mole on his neck. Emma hadn't mentioned that to her during the initial interview. This was a new detail, emerging naturally in a low-pressure environment. That was exactly the kind of detail that indicated genuine memory rather than coached testimony. Over the following 2 weeks, Doctor conducted 3 more sessions with Emma. Each time, the little girl's story remained remarkably consistent. The scar through the left eyebrow, the silver watch, the mole below the left ear, the dark hair cut short on the sides. She could even estimate his height by comparing him to her doorframe, somewhere around 6 feet tall. But Doctor also noted something else in her reports. Emma was having nightmares. Sophia reported that her daughter now refused to sleep with the light off and would wake up screaming several times a night, calling out about the bad man with the hurt eyebrow. The trauma was real and ongoing. Meanwhile, Mitchell's investigation had moved forward on other fronts. The forensic team had pulled fingerprints from the window frame and had found fibers from the intruder's clothing. DNA evidence from a ski mask left at the scene was being processed, but it was a pawn shop owner named Martinez who provided the breakthrough Mitchell had been hopping for. Martinez called the tip line after recognizing items from the robbery, specifically Sophia's laptop with its distinctive stickers, when someone tried to pawn it. "Guy came in 4 days ago," Martinez told Mitchell when she arrived at his shop. "Nervous as hell, kept looking over his shoulder. I got suspicious and told him I needed to check the serial number. He bolted, but not before my security camera got a good look at him." Mitchell's hands shook slightly as she watched the security footage. The man was in his late 20s, dark hair, approximately 6 feet tall. He turned toward the camera for just a moment, and there it was, a distinctive scar cutting through his left eyebrow. "Got him," Mitchell whispered. Running the image through facial recognition and cross-referencing with known burglary offenders in the Sacramento area produced a hit within hours. 28 years old, with a criminal record including 2 prior burglary convictions and 1 assault charge. His last known address was an apartment complex just 3 miles from the home. Mitchell pulled up booking photos from his previous arrests. The scar through his left eyebrow was prominent. He had dark hair, cut short on the sides. And there, in one photo where he'd turned his head slightly, was a small mole just below his left ear. Emma had given them a perfect description. When Mitchell showed Sophia the photograph carefully, without Emma present, the mother gasped. "That could be him. I didn't see his face clearly, but the build is right, and that scar." She touched her own eyebrow. Emma described that. The arrest came swiftly. Was picked up at his apartment along with his accomplice, a man named, whose build matched the shorter intruder Emma had described. Both men lawyered up immediately, but the evidence was mounting. The pawn shop footage, the forensics witness identification from other robberies matching their pattern. But District Attorney Laura knew that without Emma's testimony, their case had holes. His lawyer could argue the pawn shop footage was grainy, that the forensics were circumstantial, that other evidence could be explained away. Emma was the only person who could definitively place at the scene and identify him beyond reasonable doubt. Sat across from Mitchell in her office, both women exhausted from weeks of building the case. "Sarah, I need you to be honest with me. Can this little girl testify? Will she hold up under cross-examination?" Mitchell thought about Emma's consistent statements, her specific details, the way she demonstrated events without prompting. She also thought about the nightmares, the fear, the innocence that would be challenged in a courtroom. "Her memory is solid," Mitchell said carefully. "Doctors' reports confirm it. Emma's not making this up and she hasn't been coached. But Laura, she's 3 years old, putting her on that stand." She trailed off, the implications hanging heavy in the air. "I know," said quietly, "but if we don't walks, he goes free to terrorize another family. Maybe another child sees something and gets hurt because we didn't stop him now." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. Filed a motion to allow Emma to testify, knowing it would trigger a legal battle unlike any Sacramento had seen. Defense attorney Robert filed an immediate countermotion, arguing that a 3-year-old lacked to understand the oath, to distinguish truth from fantasy, to provide reliable testimony. Doctor prepared a comprehensive psychological evaluation of Emma, documenting her cognitive abilities, her understanding of truth versus lies, her memory consistency. The report was 47 pages of clinical observations, developmental assessments, and expert opinion. The conclusion: Emma was an exceptionally bright, observant child who demonstrated clear memory of the traumatic event and understood the difference between truth and falsehood at an age-appropriate level. But everyone knew that a psychological report wasn't the same as a courtroom performance. Emma would have to face Judge Harold Williams in a hearing, answer his questions, and prove she could be a credible witness. The night before the hearing, Sophia held Emma close, reading her favorite story about a brave little mouse who helped save her friends. When Emma finally fell asleep, Sophia stayed awake, staring at her daughter's peaceful face and wondering if she was making the right choice. Justice mattered, but did it matter more than protecting her baby from more trauma? Detective Mitchell lay awake too, in her own home across the city, thinking about all the cases she'd worked, all the victims she'd fought for. Emma was the youngest witness she'd ever encountered, but possibly the bravest. That little girl had looked into the face of danger and remembered every detail, even while terrified. Tomorrow would determine if the justice system was ready to listen to a voice that small but that powerful. The stakes had never been higher, and Emma didn't even fully understand what was coming. All she knew was that she'd seen the bad man with the hurt eyebrow, and somehow, telling the truth about that had become incredibly important to all the adults around her. The battle for justice was about to begin, and at its center stood a 3-year-old girl who'd witnessed something she should never have had to see. The Sacramento County Superior Courthouse stood imposing against the morning sky, its granite columns and marble steps representing decades of justice served, and, on this particular Thursday morning in April, the building would host a hearing unlike any in its history. Inside Courtroom 7, the air was thick with tension as lawyers, court staff, and a handful of permitted observers gathered for what would become a landmark hearing. Judge Harold Williams entered through his chamber doors at precisely 9:00 a.m., his black robes flowing behind him like wings. At 62, Williams had presided over thousands of cases, murders, corporate fraud, custody battles, but he'd never faced a situation quite like this. A 3-year-old witness. The very idea seemed absurd, yet here they were. District Attorney Laura sat at the prosecution table, her files meticulously organized, her expression calm despite the storm of nerves churning in her stomach. She'd spent the previous night rehearsing every possible argument, every precedent she could cite. Beside her, Detective Sarah Mitchell looked equally tense, her fingers drumming a silent rhythm on the table. Across the aisle, defense attorney Robert exuded confidence that bordered on arrogance. At 45, had built a reputation as a formidable defender, known for his aggressive cross-examinations and his ability to dismantle witnesses. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit expensive and tailored. He leaned back in his chair with the ease of someone who believed he'd already won. Sat beside, his face carefully neutral, though his hands were clenched beneath the table. The scar through his left eyebrow was clearly visible, a permanent reminder of a bar fight from his youth, a mark that had now become damning evidence. "All rise," the bailiff announced unnecessarily, as everyone was already standing. Judge Williams settled into his seat and surveyed the courtroom over his reading glasses. "Be seated. We're here today for a rather unusual matter, a hearing to determine whether Emma, age 3, can serve as a witness in the case of the People versus, and he paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Ms., this is your motion. Proceed. Stood gracefully. Your Honor, the People believe that Emma, despite her young age, is a competent and credible witness. She has provided consistent, detailed testimony across multiple interviews conducted by trained professionals. Her observations are specific, unsolicited, and corroborated by physical evidence. We have expert testimony from Dr., a licensed child psychologist, confirming Emma's cognitive abilities and her understanding of truth versus falsehood. Before Williams could respond, shot to his feet. Your Honor, with all due respect to the district attorney, this is absurd. His voice boomed across the courtroom, calculated for maximum impact. We're talking about a 3-year-old child, a toddler who probably still believes in and the tooth fairy. A few suppressed chuckles rippled through the gallery. The defense moves to exclude this testimony entirely. A child of 3 cannot comprehend the oath to tell the truth. She cannot distinguish between reality and imagination. She probably can't even spell her own name. Slammed his briefcase on the table for emphasis, the sound cracking like a gunshot. The People are asking this court to set a dangerous precedent, allowing testimony from someone who lacks the fundamental cognitive capacity to serve as a witness. It's not just unprecedented, Your Honor. It's unconscionable. Judge Williams raised a hand for silence. Mister, I understand your objections. However, California law does not set a minimum age for witness. It requires only that the witness can perceive, remember, and communicate what they perceived, and that they understand the duty to tell the truth. Those are the standards we must apply. Standards designed for adults, Your Honor, countered, his face reddening. Not for children who still watch Sesame Street. Rose again, her voice calm but firm, a stark contrast to theatrics. Your Honor, the defense is making assumptions about Emma's capabilities without having assessed her. We request that the court conduct a dire examination of Emma to determine her firsthand. Let Emma demonstrate her abilities rather than having Mr. dismiss her based solely on her age. Williams nodded slowly. A reasonable request. However, I want this done carefully. We're not going to traumatize a child in my courtroom. I'll conduct the examination in my chambers with only essential personnel present, counsel for both sides, the court reporter, and the child's mother. Ms., have the child brought to my chambers in 30 minutes. We'll take a recess until then. The gavel struck and the courtroom erupted into whispered conversations. Mitchell leaned toward. Do you think Emma's ready for this? She has to be, whispered back, because if she's not, walks free. 30 minutes later, Emma entered Judge Williams's chambers holding her mother's hand. The room was less intimidating than the courtroom. Wood-paneled walls, family photos on the credenza, a window overlooking the city. Williams had removed his judicial robes and sat in a regular chair rather than behind his massive desk, trying to appear less imposing. Emma wore a blue dress with white daisies, her dark curls pulled back with a matching headband. She clutched a worn stuffed elephant, Mr. Trunk, against her chest, her brown eyes wide and uncertain as she took in the room and the adults watching her. Hello, Emma, Williams said softly, his normally authoritative voice gentle. My name is Judge Williams, but you can call me Mr. Williams. Is that okay? Emma nodded slightly, pressing closer to her mother. Emma, I'm going to ask you some questions. There are no wrong answers and you're not in any trouble. I just want to talk with you for a little while. Does that sound okay? Another small nod. William smiled. That's good. Can you tell me how old you are, Emma? Emma held up 3 fingers. I'm 3. I'm gonna be 4 on my birthday. And when is your birthday? September 22, Emma said, her voice gaining a bit more confidence. Sophia had practiced this with her dozens of times. Excellent, Emma. Can you tell me what color my tie is? Williams pointed to his red striped tie. Red, Emma answered immediately. Very good, and can you count to 10 for me? Emma counted carefully, concentrating hard, getting all the way to 10 without mistakes. Shifted impatiently in his chair, clearly unimpressed by these basic questions. Williams continued patiently. Emma, do you know what it means to tell the truth? Emma nodded. It means saying what really happened, not making up stories. That's exactly right. And what happens if someone doesn't tell the truth, if they lie? Emma's face became serious. That's bad. Mommy says lying is wrong, you get in trouble. Your mommy is very wise. Emma, if I told you that my tie was blue, would that be the truth or a lie? Emma looked at the red tie, then back at Williams with confusion. That's a lie. It's red, not blue. You're absolutely correct. Now, Emma, can you tell me about your favorite color? Pink, Emma said enthusiastically, and purple, I like both. Cleared his throat. Your Honor, while I'm impressed that the child can count and identify colors, this hardly demonstrates capacity to testify about a traumatic event or withstand cross-examination. Williams held up a hand. Mister, I'm not finished. He turned back to Emma. Emma, I heard something scary happen at your house. Can you tell me about that? Emma's expression immediately changed, her body tensing. She hugged Mr. Trunk. The bad mans came in our window. They broke it. Crash. She made a breaking gesture with her hands. That must have been very frightening. Where were you when this happened? In my room with Mommy, we were singing my song. Emma's voice became quieter. Then I hid by my door, right here. She demonstrated by pressing herself against the wall, making herself small, the same gesture she'd shown Doctor. And what did you see from your hiding spot? The bad man's taking our stuff, and then, Emma paused, gathering courage. The tall bad man took off his mask. What did he look like, Emma? Without hesitation, Emma traced a line through her left eyebrow. His eyebrow was broken, like someone cut it, and he had dark spiky hair and a shiny watch and a brown spot on his neck, right here. She pointed to the spot below her left ear with remarkable precision. The room fell silent, even seemed momentarily taken aback by the specificity and confidence of Emma's description. Williams leaned forward slightly. Emma, you're being very brave. Now this is important. Did anyone tell you what to say today? Did anyone practice these answers with you? Emma shook her head. No, Mommy just said to tell the truth about what I saw. And is that what you're doing? Telling the truth about what you saw? Yes, Emma said simply. I saw the bad man with the hurt eyebrow. He looked at me. I was scared, but I remember. William studied the little girl for a long moment, then made some notes. He asked several more questions about Emma's daily routine, her understanding of promises, the difference between real and pretend. Through it all, Emma answered with a consistency and clarity that was remarkable for her age. After 45 minutes, William stood. Thank you, Emma. You did wonderfully. Your mom is going to take you to wait outside now while the adults talk some more, okay? After Sophia and Emma left the chambers, Williams returned to his desk and faced the attorneys. I've presided over this court for 18 years. I've seen adult witnesses who couldn't maintain the consistency, specificity, and clarity that child just demonstrated. Jumped in. Your Honor, she's been coached. She has not, Williams interrupted firmly. I asked specifically about coaching, and her responses showed spontaneity and genuine recall. Mister, I've reviewed Doctor's psychological evaluation. I've read the interview transcripts, and I've now examined Emma myself. That child understands the duty to tell the truth. She can perceive, remember, and communicate her observations. Those are the legal standards for witness in California. He paused, his expression grave. I'm granting the people's motion. Emma will be permitted to testify at trial. However, he raised a finger in warning, I'm imposing strict conditions. The courtroom will be closed to the public. The child will be allowed frequent breaks. Cross-examination will be conducted respectfully, and I will not tolerate aggressive tactics that could traumatize or intimidate her. Mister, if you step out of line even once, I will hold you in contempt. Are we clear? His jaw clenched. Crystal clear, Your Honor, though I must note my objection for the record. Noted. This court stands in recess. Williams's gavel fell and the die was cast. As they left the chambers, felt a mixture of triumph and terror. They'd won the right for Emma to testify, but now came the harder part, actually putting that little girl on the stand and hoping she could withstand the pressure of a criminal trial. Brushed past them in the hallway, his voice low but cutting. Enjoy your victory, counselor, but when I'm done cross-examining that child, the jury won't know what to believe. She'll fall apart and your whole case falls with her. Mitchell stepped forward protectively. She's stronger than you think. Smiled coldly. She's 3 years old. We'll see how strong she is when I question her judgment, her memory, her perception. Children are easy to confuse, detective. You know that as well as I do. As walked away and Mitchell exchanged worried glances. The hearing was over, but the real battle, the trial itself, still lay ahead. And Emma, the bravest 3-year-old witness in Sacramento's history, would soon face her greatest test yet. Dr. James Thornton sat in his home office at 11:47 p.m., the glow of his computer screen illuminating his tired face as he reviewed Emma's case file for the 3rd time that evening. At 53, the court-appointed child psychologist had worked with hundreds of traumatized children throughout his career, but something about Emma's situation gnawed at him. The hearing had been a success. The little girl had proven herself remarkably capable, but capability and comfort were two entirely different things. He'd watched the video recording of Emma's chamber interview with Judge Williams, studying every microexpression, every shift in her body language. When discussing the break-in, Emma's shoulders had drawn inward, her breathing had quickened, and she'd clutched her stuffed elephant so tightly her knuckles turned white. She was reliving the trauma even as she about it. Dr. Thornton had seen this pattern before. Child witnesses who seemed fine during preparation would sometimes freeze completely when faced with the formal courtroom setting. The elevated judge's bench, the jury box filled with strangers, the defendant staring at them from across the room. The psychological term was re-traumatization, and it could undo weeks of careful preparation in seconds. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. There had to be a way to help Emma feel safe enough to testify without compromising the integrity of the trial. His gaze drifted to a framed photograph on his desk, his late wife Sarah with their golden retriever, Murphy, who had passed away 2 years prior. Murphy had been a certified therapy dog, trained to provide emotional support to patients at the children's hospital where Sarah had worked as a pediatric nurse. An idea sparked in Dr. Thornton's mind, wild, unconventional but potentially brilliant. He grabbed his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Deputy Barnes, a man he'd met at a law enforcement conference the previous year. Barnes worked with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department's K-9 unit, but his dog wasn't a typical police canine. Officer Max was what they called a dual-purpose dog, trained not only in suspect apprehension and narcotics detection, but also in victim support and crisis response. Despite the late hour, Thornton dialed the number. Barnes answered on the 3rd ring, his voice groggy. "This is Barnes, who's calling at midnight." "It's James Thornton, the child psychologist from the conference last year. I'm sorry to call so late, but I have an unusual situation that might require Max's special skills." There was rustling on the other end as Barnes sat up. "Max, what kind of situation?" Thornton explained the case, the 3-year-old witness, the upcoming trial, his concerns about Emma's ability to testify without severe emotional distress. "I've read about courthouse facility dogs being used in other states," Thornton continued, his words speeding up with excitement. "Dogs that sit with child witnesses during testimony to provide comfort and reduce anxiety. Max has that victim support training, doesn't he?" He does, Barnes confirmed, now fully awake and interested. Max has worked with traumatized kids before, assault victims, kids who witnessed domestic violence. He's incredibly gentle, almost seems to sense when someone needs him. But I've never heard of using a K-9 during actual court testimony. That's because it's rare, but not unprecedented, Thornton said, already pulling up research articles on his computer. There are programs in Washington, New York, and a few other states. The dogs provide a calming presence that helps vulnerable witnesses testify without being overwhelmed by fear. I think Max could be the key to helping Emma face her attacker without falling apart. Barnes was quiet for a moment. Doc, I'm willing to try, but you know how lawyers are. The defense is going to fight this tooth and nail. They'll say it prejudices the jury, that a police dog makes their client look guilty. Leave the legal arguments to me and the DA, Thornton said with newfound confidence. I need you to tell me honestly, can Max handle this? Sitting still for potentially hours, staying calm in a tense courtroom environment, focusing entirely on comforting a child. Max is the most professional dog I've ever worked with, Barnes said without hesitation. If anyone can do this, he can. But the real question is, will the kid be okay with a 70-pound German Shepherd? Some children are terrified of dogs, especially large ones. Thornton paused. He hadn't considered that possibility. That's a valid concern. We'd need to introduce them carefully, let Emma meet Max in a controlled environment before the trial. No pressure, just see if they connect. When's the trial scheduled? 3 weeks from tomorrow. Barnes whistled low. That's tight, but okay, Doc. If you can get the legal approval, Max and I are in. This little girl deserves every possible support. The next morning, Dr. Thornton arrived at District Attorney Laura's office at 8:00 a.m. sharp, carrying a briefcase full of research studies, precedent cases, and his proposal outlined in a formal memo. Looked up from her morning coffee, surprised by the early visit. Dr. Thornton, I wasn't expecting you. Is everything okay with Emma? Emma's fine, but I have a proposal that might seem unorthodox. He set his briefcase down and pulled out a stack of papers. I want to request that Emma be allowed to testify with a support animal present, specifically, a trained courthouse facility dog. His eyebrows shot up. A dog in my courtroom during testimony. Not just any dog, Thornton said quickly, launching into his explanation. He spread research studies across her desk, data showing that child witnesses who with facility dogs present showed significantly lower stress hormones, more consistent testimony, and better overall psychological outcomes. He cited cases from other jurisdictions where such testimony had been allowed and upheld on appeal. This German Shepherd, Officer Max, is trained specifically for this purpose, Thornton continued. He works with the sheriff's department, so he's accustomed to courtroom environments. He's helped traumatized children before. Laura, Emma is strong, but she's also 3 years old and terrified. What happens if she gets up on that stand, sees staring at her, and shuts down completely? All your preparation, all her bravery, it could evaporate in seconds. Studied the research materials, her prosecutorial mind already running through the implications. We'll argue this prejudices the jury. A police dog sitting next to the witness sends a message that she needs protection from his client. Then we use a neutral vest on Max, no police insignia. And there's precedent for this. Courts have ruled that facility dogs are no more prejudicial than allowing a witness to hold a teddy bear or have a support person present. In fact, there's a landmark case from Washington State. He rifled through papers. State v. 2008, where the court explicitly ruled that a dog's presence doesn't constitute improper bolstering of testimony. Was intrigued despite her skepticism. What does Emma think about dogs? Is she comfortable with them? That's the crucial question, Thornton admitted. We'd need to arrange a meeting between Emma and Max before committing to this approach. If she's terrified of him, obviously this won't work. But if they connect... He trailed off, letting the possibility hang in the air. Made her decision. Write up a formal motion. Include all this research. I'll file it with Judge Williams and notify the defense. But Dr. Thornton, we need that meeting with Emma and the dog to happen ASAP. If this is going to work, Emma needs time to build trust with the animal. I'll arrange it for this week, Thornton promised. 3 days later, the motion landed on Robert's desk like a bomb. He read it once, then read it again, his face turning progressively redder. "A therapy dog," he shouted to his paralegal. "They want to bring a German shepherd into my courtroom. This is outrageous." Immediately filed a blistering opposition brief, arguing that a police dog's presence would irrevocably prejudice the jury, that it sent a subliminal message that his client was dangerous, that it was nothing more than a theatrical stunt designed to generate sympathy for a witness whose testimony was already questionable. Judge Williams read both motions carefully, then did something unexpected. He called both attorneys into his chambers for an informal discussion. "I've researched this issue," Williams said, gesturing to law books open on his desk. "Facility dogs in courtrooms are becoming more common, particularly with child witnesses. The legal precedents seem to support allowing it with proper precautions." "Your Honor, this is prejudicial," began. "Let me finish, mister. I'm inclined to allow this, but with conditions. First, I want to meet this dog myself. If Officer Max seems aggressive or distracting in any way, the request is. Second, the dog must wear a neutral vest, nothing that identifies him as a police dog. Third, jury instructions will explicitly state that the dog's presence is merely for witness comfort and carries no implications about the defendant's guilt or innocence." His jaw clenched. "I maintain my objection for the record." "Noted. Now I understand there's a scheduled meeting between the child and the dog. I want a full report on how that goes. If the child is frightened of the animal, this entire discussion is moot." Williams looked at both attorneys over his glasses. "My priority is ensuring this trial is fair to the defendant while also protecting a 3-year-old witness from unnecessary trauma. If this dog can help achieve that balance, I'm willing to consider it." That afternoon, Dr. Thornton called Deputy Barnes with the news. "Judge Williams is open to it, pending the meeting with Emma. This is our shot. Max needs to be at his absolute best." "Max is always at his best, Doc. Trust me on that. When do you want to do this?" "Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. The courtroom will be empty. Just Emma, her mother, you, me, and DA. Low pressure. Let them meet naturally." Barnes looked down at Officer Max, who was resting his massive head on Barnes' knee, dark eyes alert and intelligent. "You hear that, partner? Tomorrow, you might just become the most important witness support in Sacramento history." Max's tail thumped against the floor, as if he understood the gravity of what was coming. The stage was set for an unprecedented meeting. A traumatized 3-year-old girl and a 70-pound German shepherd. Two beings from completely different worlds, about to discover if they could trust each other enough to face the justice system together. Everything hinged on tomorrow. Everything hinged on whether Emma and Officer Max could form a bond strong enough to withstand the coming storm. The Sacramento County Courthouse was eerily quiet at 2:00 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon. Most courtrooms were in recess, the hallways empty, except for the occasional echo of footsteps on marble floors. In Courtroom 7, District Attorney Laura stood near the prosecutor's table, checking her watch for the 3rd time in as many minutes. Dr. James Thornton paced near the jury box, his nervous energy filling the empty space. "She should be here any minute," Thornton said, more to himself than to. "Sophia texted 5 minutes ago. They're in the parking garage." Nodded, but her mind was racing through contingencies. Everything hinged on the next hour. If Emma was terrified of Officer Max, they'd have to proceed with the trial using traditional support methods. A familiar adult, frequent breaks, maybe allowing her to hold a stuffed animal. But those measures felt inadequate against the weight of what Emma would face. Testifying in front of her attacker, enduring cross-examination from a skilled defense attorney, reliving the worst night of her young life. The courtroom doors opened, and Deputy Barnes entered with Officer Max at his side. The German shepherd moved with fluid grace, his black and tan coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Max wore a simple blue vest with the word support embroidered on it, no police insignia, nothing that screamed law enforcement. Just a dog trained to help people in crisis. Barnes had chosen Max carefully from the department's K-9 unit 6 years ago, specifically because of the dog's unique temperament. While most police dogs were selected for their drive and intensity, Max had shown something different, an uncanny ability to read human emotions and respond with appropriate gentleness or strength. He tracked suspects through dangerous neighborhoods, yes, but he'd also sat quietly beside domestic violence victims while they gave statements, his mere presence providing comfort that words couldn't offer. "How's he doing?" Thornton asked, approaching slowly. "Calm as always," Barnes replied, giving Max's head an affectionate pat. "I gave him extra exercise this morning, a good run and some training drills. He's relaxed but alert, perfect state for meeting Emma." Max's dark eyes surveyed the courtroom with intelligent curiosity. His ears swiveled at every small sound, the hum of the air conditioning, the creak of a bench, heels clicking on the floor, but his body language remained loose and comfortable. This was a dog completely at ease with himself and his surroundings. "Positions everyone," said suddenly, having received a text. "They're coming up the elevator now." They'd planned this carefully. Barnes would position Max at the far end of the courtroom, away from the door. The dog would be lying down, appearing as non-threatening as possible. Emma would enter with her mother and have the full length of the room to observe Max before getting anywhere near him. No pressure, no forced interaction, just an opportunity for a little girl and a big dog to decide if they could trust each other. Barnes led Max to the spot they'd selected, near the witness box but far from the entrance. "Down," he commanded softly. Max immediately dropped to the floor, settling into a sphinx position with his head resting on his extended paws. His tail curved around his body, and he looked almost like a statue, peaceful, patient, harmless. "Good boy," Barnes whispered, giving him the hand signal that meant "stay calm, you're working." The courtroom doors opened again, and Sophia entered, holding Emma's hand. The 3-year-old wore pink sneakers that lit up with each step, jeans, and a white t-shirt with a cartoon butterfly. Her dark hair was pulled into 2 ponytails, and she clutched Mr. Trunk, her stuffed elephant, under one arm. Her eyes were wide with curiosity and nervousness. "Hi, Emma," Dr. Thornton said warmly, kneeling to her level near the entrance. "Thank you for coming today. Do you remember me?" Emma nodded, pressing closer to her mother's leg. "You're the nice talking doctor." "That's right. Emma, we asked you to come today because we want you to meet a very special friend. His name is Max, and he's a dog who helps people when they're scared or sad. He's way over there." Thornton gestured toward the far end of the courtroom. "Would it be okay if you just looked at him for a minute? You don't have to go near him. Just look." Emma's gaze followed Thornton's gesture, and her breath caught audibly when she saw Officer Max. The German shepherd was enormous from her perspective, probably as tall as she was even when lying down. His pointed ears, his long snout, his powerful body, everything about him radiated strength. Emma's grip on her mother's hand tightened painfully. Sophia felt her daughter's whole body tense, saw the fear flash across her face. This wasn't going well. He's really big, Mommy," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "He is big," Sophia agreed softly, kneeling beside her daughter. "But see how still he's being. He's just lying there quietly. He's not barking or jumping around. He looks pretty calm, doesn't he?" At the far end of the courtroom, Barnes had noticed Emma's fear. He gave Max a subtle signal, a slight movement of his hand that meant make yourself smaller, less threatening. Max responded immediately, lowering his head even further until his chin rested flat on the floor. His eyes remained open but soft, his ears relaxed rather than alert and forward. For a full 5 minutes, nothing happened. Emma stood frozen near the door, staring at Max. Max remained perfectly still, like a living statue. The adults in the room barely breathed, understanding that this was Emma's moment, her decision, her pace. Then Sophia felt it, the tiniest release of tension in her daughter's hand. Emma took one small step forward, just one, but it was a step toward Max rather than away from him. "You're doing great, sweetheart," Sophia whispered. "Take your time." Another minute passed. Then Emma took another step, and another. Each movement was hesitant, uncertain, but deliberate. She was approaching the dog of her own volition, driven by something the adults couldn't quite name. Maybe curiosity, maybe bravery, maybe just the sense that this big, scary-looking animal wasn't actually scary at all. Halfway across the courtroom, Emma stopped again. Max's tail gave the slightest wag, just the tip moving back and forth once, twice. It was such a gentle, non-threatening gesture that Emma's face changed. The fear didn't disappear entirely, but something else crept in alongside it. Interest. "He has a tail," Emma observed quietly, as if this was a revelation. "He does," Dr. Thornton confirmed, staying back near Sophia. "And when he's happy, his tail wags. Did you see it move just a little bit?" Emma nodded slowly. She took 3 more steps, now just 10 feet from Max. From this distance, she could see his face more clearly. The gentle brown eyes, the slight around his muzzle that made him look wise rather than fierce, the way his tongue lolled out slightly in a relaxed pant. "Hi," Emma said, her voice barely audible. Max's tail thumped once against the floor in response. Barnes fought back a smile. Max understood tone even when he couldn't possibly understand the words. The dog knew this was someone fragile, someone who needed gentleness. Emma looked back at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. The little girl gathered her courage and walked closer, 5 feet away now, then 3. She stopped just out of reach, studying Max with the intense focus only children possess. Can I touch him?" Emma asked, looking at Deputy Barnes for the first time. Barnes' heart swelled. "Yes, you can. Max would like that very much. He's very soft. You can pet his head or his back, whatever feels comfortable to you." Emma reached out with one tiny hand, trembling slightly. She touched just the very tip of Max's ear, the briefest contact, ready to pull back at any sign of threat. Max's ear twitched at the sensation, but otherwise he didn't move. He barely seemed to breathe. Emboldened, Emma placed her whole palm on Max's head. The dog's fur was thick and surprisingly soft, warm beneath her fingers. Max's eyes half closed in contentment, and a sound emerged from his chest, a soft, rumbling sigh of happiness that Emma felt through her hand. "He's purring," Emma exclaimed, delighted. "Dogs don't purr, sweetie," Sophia said gently, tears forming in her eyes as she watched her traumatized daughter connecting with this animal. "But he is making happy sounds. He likes you." That did it. The fear melted away from Emma's face, replaced by wonder. She sat down cross-legged right next to Max, her pink sneakers lighting up with the movement. "You're a nice," she told him seriously, "not a scary at all." Max, sensing the shift, slowly lifted his head and rested it on Emma's lap. The weight of it made the little girl giggle, a sound that made every adult in the room exhale in relief. It was the first genuinely joyful sound anyone had heard from Emma since the night of the break-in. "He likes you too," Barnes said, his voice thick with emotion. This was why he'd chosen this work, why he'd spent countless hours training Max for exactly this kind of moment. For the next 20 minutes, Emma sat beside Max, talking to him about everything and nothing. She told him about Mr. Trunk, her favorite foods, the song she'd been singing the night the bad men came. Max listened with apparent interest, his tail wagging periodically, occasionally nuzzling Emma's hand with his snout when she paused for too long. Dr. Thornton watched the interaction with professional fascination. Emma's body language had completely transformed. Her shoulders were relaxed, her breathing even, her voice animated rather than fearful. In Max's presence, she was acting like a normal 3-year-old again, not a trauma victim. "Emma," Thornton said gently after she'd had time to bond with Max, "you know how we talked about the trial, about telling the judge and the people what you saw that scary night?" Emma's hand stilled on Max's back. Some of the tension returned to her small frame. The bad man with the hurt eyebrow. "Yes, exactly. Well, if you wanted, Max could sit right next to you when you talk about that, just like he's sitting with you now. He could be your friend who helps you feel brave. Would you like that?" Emma looked down at Max, whose dark eyes gazed back at her with unwavering gentleness. She nodded slowly. "Will he stay with me the whole time?" "The entire time," Barnes promised. "Max is very good at his job, which is helping people feel safe. He won't leave your side." Emma seemed to consider this, her child's mind processing the promise. Then she wrapped her arms around Max's neck, pressing her face into his fur. "Okay," she said, her voice muffled. "If Max is there, I can do it. I can tell about the bad man." Sophia covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face, and Thornton exchanged looks of profound relief. Barnes knelt beside Emma and Max, placing a hand on each of them. "You're very brave, Emma," Barnes said, "and Max knows it. He's going to be so proud to be your friend." As if understanding the weight of this moment, Max shifted slightly and licked Emma's cheek. A gentle, affectionate gesture that made the little girl dissolve into giggles again. The sound echoed through the empty courtroom, a sound of hope and healing, proof that even in the darkest situations, connections could form that gave people strength they didn't know they possessed. The meeting lasted another 30 minutes, with Emma gradually becoming more comfortable, even playful, with Max. By the end, she was showing him Mr. Trunk, trying to teach him to shake hands, and declaring that Max was now her best friend besides Mommy. When it was finally time to leave, Emma hugged Max fiercely. "I'll see you at the trial, okay, Max? Don't forget about me." Max's tail wagged enthusiastically and Barnes smiled. "He could never forget you, Emma. You're pretty unforgettable." As Sophia and Emma left the courtroom, the little girl chattered excitedly about her new friend, the fear that had shadowed her for weeks finally beginning to lift. Dr. Thornton turned to Barnes with profound gratitude. "You were right about him. Max is extraordinary." Barnes looked down at his partner, who sat calmly at his side, as if what had just transpired was simply another day's work. "No, Doc, kids are extraordinary. Max just knows how to meet them where they are. That little girl is going to change Sacramento's justice system, and Max is going to help her do it." The unconventional solution had worked. Emma had found her guardian, and Officer Max had found his most important assignment yet. Together, they would face the courtroom and make history. The morning of May 15th dawned and overcast, as if the sky itself understood the weight of what was about to unfold. Sophia had barely slept, lying awake most of the night listening to Emma's soft breathing from the bed beside her. She'd moved her daughter into her room the night before, unable to bear the thought of being apart even for those final hours before the trial. At 6:30 a.m., Emma stirred, her dark eyes blinking open. "Mommy, is today the day I see Max?" Sophia's heart clenched. Of course that's what Emma was thinking about. Not the trial, not the testimony, not the bad man with the hurt eyebrow. Just her friend, the gentle German shepherd who'd given her back a piece of the courage stolen from her that terrible night. "Yes, baby, today's the day." Sophia smoothed Emma's wild curls back from her face. "Are you scared?" Emma considered the question with the seriousness only a 3-year-old could muster. "A little bit scared, but Max will be there, so it's okay," he promised. Actually, Deputy Barnes had promised, but Sophia didn't correct her. If Emma believed Max himself had made that vow, that was fine. Whatever got her daughter through the day ahead. They chose Emma's outfit carefully. The yellow dress with sunflowers that made her look like sunshine itself, white tights, and her favorite black Mary Jane shoes. Sophia brushed Emma's hair into soft curls and added a yellow ribbon. Looking at her daughter in the mirror, Sophia had to blink back tears. Emma looked so innocent, so small, so utterly unprepared for the machinery of justice she was about to enter. The drive to the courthouse took 20 minutes through Sacramento's morning traffic. Emma sat in her car seat, humming to herself and making Mr. Trunk dance on her lap. She seemed almost excited, like they were going to a birthday party rather than a criminal trial. Sophia her daughter's innocence even as she ached to preserve it. The courthouse parking garage was already filling up despite the early hour. Media trucks lined the street outside. Word had leaked about the unprecedented case of the 3-year-old witness and the facility dog. Judge Williams had issued a strict gag order and banned cameras from the courtroom, but that hadn't stopped reporters from gathering like vultures, hopping for a statement. Detective Sarah Mitchell met them at the private entrance, having arranged security to keep them away from the press. "Good morning, Emma," Mitchell said warmly, kneeling down. "You look beautiful. Are you ready for your big day?" "I get to see Max," Emma announced, as if this explained everything. Mitchell exchanged a knowing look with Sophia. "Yes, you do. Deputy Barnes and Max are already upstairs waiting for you. They're very excited to see you too." Inside the courthouse, the halls echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. Court personnel moved with practiced efficiency, but Sophia noticed them glancing at Emma with expressions ranging from curiosity to sympathy to outright concern. A 3-year-old witness. Everyone wanted to see if it was really going to happen. They arrived at a small conference room adjacent to Courtroom 7, designated as their waiting area. Dr. James Thornton was already there, reviewing his notes. District Attorney Laura sat at the table, dressed in a navy suit that conveyed authority without aggression. And there, in the corner, sat Deputy Barnes with Officer Max lying calmly at his feet. "Max!" Emma shrieked with pure joy, breaking free from her mother's hand and running across the room. Max's tail began wagging furiously, and he stood as Emma barreled into him, wrapping her tiny arms around his neck. The big dog nuzzled her face, his whole body wiggling with happiness at seeing his friend again. "He remembered me," Emma said, delighted beyond measure. "Of course he remembered you," Barnes said, smiling. "Max never forgets his friends. He's been looking forward to today because he gets to spend it with you." The reunion was exactly what Emma needed. For 15 minutes, she sat on the floor with Max, chattering away about everything that had happened in the 2 weeks since they'd met. Max listened attentively, occasionally licking her hand or resting his head on her shoulder. Sophia watched her daughter's face glow with happiness and felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it almost knocked her over. This dog, this extraordinary animal, was giving Emma something no human could: unconditional comfort without fear or judgment. At 8:45 a.m., checked her watch. "We should go over the procedure one more time," she said gently. "Emma, can you come sit with me for a minute? Max can come too." Emma climbed into a chair, and Max immediately positioned himself beside her, close enough that she could rest her hand on his back. Explained in simple terms what would happen. They'd walk into the courtroom. Emma would sit in a special chair near the judge. Max would sit right beside her on cushions placed there just for him, and then people would ask her questions about what she saw. "Will the bad man be there?" Emma asked, her voice suddenly smaller. Paused. They discussed this extensively, honesty versus protection. "Yes, honey. The man you saw that night will be sitting in the room, but he'll be far away from you, and there are police officers there to keep everyone safe. And Max will be right beside you the whole time. He won't let anything happen to you." Emma processed this, her small hand gripping Max's fur. "Okay, if Max says it's safe, then it's safe." At 9:00 a.m. precisely, they began the walk to Courtroom 7. The hallway seemed to stretch forever. Emma held her mother's hand on one side while her other hand rested on Max's back as he walked beside her. Barnes maintained the leash loosely, but Max needed no guidance. The dog stayed perfectly positioned next to Emma, matching his pace to her small steps. Judge Williams had arranged for them to enter through a side door, avoiding the main gallery entrance. As they approached, Sophia felt Emma's hand begin to sweat in hers. The little girl was finally understanding the magnitude of what she was about to do. "I'm scared, Mommy," Emma whispered. Before Sophia could respond, Max did something remarkable. He stopped walking and gently pressed his shoulder against Emma's leg, a deliberate, supportive gesture that Barnes had trained for moments exactly like this. Emma looked down at the dog, whose dark eyes gazed up at her with such steady confidence that her breathing began to slow. "Max believes in you," Barnes said quietly, "and so do all of us." The courtroom was exactly as Judge Williams had promised, modified for Emma's comfort but still maintaining the dignity and formality of the judicial process. The public gallery had been cleared except for a few approved observers, victim advocates, court personnel, and a child welfare representative monitoring the proceedings. The jury box sat empty for now. The jury would be brought in after Emma was settled. Sat at the defense table beside Robert, his face carefully neutral. But when Emma entered and his eyes landed on her, something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps guilt, maybe just surprise at how small she was. The scar through his left eyebrow was clearly visible even from across the room. Emma saw him immediately. Her step faltered, her breath caught. Sophia felt her daughter's entire body tense with fear and recognition. This was the moment they'd all worried about. Would Emma freeze? Would she shut down? Would the trauma overwhelm her? But then Max was there, pressing against her leg again, his solid warmth a reminder that she wasn't alone. Barnes had positioned them perfectly. Emma's view of would be partially blocked by the witness chair setup, and Max would serve as a physical and psychological barrier. The witness area had been transformed. Instead of the standard chair elevated high above the courtroom floor, there was a smaller chair at a more accessible height, with a step stool to help Emma climb up. Beside it, large cushions had been arranged on the floor, a space clearly designed for Max. "Up you go, sweetheart," Sophia said, helping Emma onto the step stool and then into the chair. The moment Emma was seated, Max moved into position without any command from Barnes. The German shepherd settled onto the cushions, positioning himself so that Emma could easily reach down and touch him. His head came up to exactly Emma's hand level when she let her arm hang naturally, a perfect height for comfort. Emma's fingers immediately found Max's fur, gripping it like a lifeline. Max leaned gently into her touch, providing steady, calm pressure. His breathing was slow and even, a physical anchor for Emma's racing heart. Judge Williams entered, and everyone stood. When he saw Emma in the witness chair with Max beside her, something softened in his weathered face. This was history being made in his courtroom, a moment that would be referenced in law journals and child advocacy training for years to come. "Please be seated," Williams said, his voice gentler than usual. He looked directly at Emma with grandfatherly warmth. "Good morning, Emma. I'm very glad to see you today, and I see you brought your friend Max." Emma nodded, some of her fear easing at the judge's kind tone. "Max is helping me be brave." "Max is doing an excellent job," Williams said. "Emma, I know we talked before about telling the truth. Do you remember that?" "Yes, lying is wrong, I tell the truth." "That's exactly right. Now some people are going to ask you questions and you just answer as best as you can. If you don't understand a question, you can say so. If you need a break, you tell me. And Max is going to stay right there beside you. Does that sound okay?" "Okay," Emma said, her voice small but steady. Her hand never left Max's back. Williams nodded to the bailiff, who brought in the jury, 12 men and women who'd been carefully selected, vetted for their ability to fairly judge testimony from a child witness. As they filed in and saw Emma sitting there with the large German shepherd beside her, several jurors' expressions visibly softened. One woman's eyes immediately filled with tears. District Attorney stood and approached the witness chair slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She'd practiced this moment dozens of times, knowing that how she began would set the tone for everything that followed. "Hi, Emma, it's good to see you again. How are you feeling today?" "A little bit scared," Emma answered honestly, "but Max is here, so it's okay." "Max is wonderful," agreed. She held up a board with several photographs attached. "Emma, I'm going to show you some pictures. I want you to look at them very carefully and tell me if you recognize anyone. Take your time. There's no rush." Emma's hand tightened on Max's fur. The dog remained perfectly still, but his tail gave one gentle thump, a reminder that he was there, that she was safe. Emma looked at the photographs, her eyes moving from one face to another. When she reached the third photo, her finger stopped. The courtroom held its collective breath. "That one," Emma said, her voice clear despite her fear. She was pointing directly at its photograph. "Can you tell us who that is?" asked gently. Emma's eyes moved from the photograph to the defense table, where sat frozen. The 3-year-old's gaze locked with the man who'd terrorized her family, whose face had haunted her nightmares for weeks. For one long, terrible moment, everyone feared she would shut down. But then Emma felt Max shift slightly beside her, felt his warm breath on her leg, felt the solid reality of his presence. She looked down at her friend, gathering courage from his steady calm, and then looked back up. "That's the bad man," Emma said quietly. "The one who broke our window, the one with the hurt eyebrow." The words fell into the courtroom like stones dropping into still water, sending ripples through everyone present. Started to rise with an objection, but seemed to think better of it. What could he possibly say in this moment that wouldn't make him look cruel? Continued carefully, establishing the foundation of Emma's testimony. But everyone in that courtroom knew they just witnessed something profound. A 3-year-old girl, protected by a dog and strengthened by truth, had looked her nightmare in the face and spoken its name aloud. The day of reckoning had truly begun. The courtroom had fallen into a rhythm of careful questioning and gentle answers. District Attorney Laura had spent the past 40 minutes establishing Emma's testimony with methodical precision. She'd asked about the night of the break-in, about what Emma had seen from her hiding place, about the moment when the tall intruder removed his mask. Emma had answered each question clearly, her small voice carrying through the hushed courtroom, her hand never leaving Officer Max's back. The jury watched with rapt attention, several members leaning forward in their seats. Emma's testimony was unlike anything they'd ever witnessed, the unfiltered honesty of a child describing something terrifying, made bearable only by the gentle presence of the German shepherd beside her. Max hadn't moved except for the occasional shift to press more firmly against Emma's leg when her voice wavered or her breathing quickened. Approached the evidence table and picked up the board with photographs again. "Emma, I want to show you these pictures one more time. You pointed to one earlier. Can you point to that same person again?" Without hesitation, Emma's small finger touched photograph. Him, the bad man with the hurt eyebrow. "And Emma," continued, "do you see that person here in this courtroom today?" This was the critical moment, in-person identification. Emma's eyes traveled from the photograph to the defense table. Sat rigid, his jaw clenched, the scar through his left eyebrow stark against his skin under the courtroom lights. Emma stared at him for several long seconds and stared back, unable or unwilling to look away from the tiny witness whose memory might seal his fate. "He's sitting right there," Emma said, pointing directly next to the man in the suit. A collective exhale seemed to ripple through the courtroom. Had what she needed, positive identification from the photographs and in person. "Thank you, Emma. You're doing wonderfully. I have no further questions, Your Honor." Judge Williams looked at the defense table. "Mr. Your witness." Robert stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate movements. This was his moment, the opportunity he'd been waiting for, to dismantle a 3-year-old's testimony, to expose the holes in her memory, to create reasonable doubt. He'd cross-examined hundreds of witnesses, reduced grown men to contradicting themselves, made confident women second-guess their own perceptions. Surely a toddler would be easy. But as he approached Emma, something in the courtroom shifted. The jury's body language changed, arms crossed, faces hardening. They were protective of this little girl, and its usual aggressive tactics would backfire spectacularly. He needed to be careful, surgical, and above all, he needed to appear sympathetic while still destroying her credibility. "Hello," Emma said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "My name is Mr. I just want to ask you a few questions, okay?" Emma nodded slightly, her hand tightening on Max's fur. The dog seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. His ears swiveled toward, tracking his movements, though his body remained relaxed beside Emma. "Emma, that was a very scary night when those men came to your house, wasn't it?" "Yes," Emma said quietly. "You must have been very, very frightened." "I was scared." Nodded sympathetically. "Of course you were. Any child would be. Emma, when you're really scared, sometimes it's hard to see things clearly, isn't it? Sometimes when we're afraid, things look different than they really are." Started to rise with an objection, but Judge Williams raised his hand slightly. He wanted to see where this was going. "I saw him," Emma said simply. "The bad man took off his mask. I saw his face." "But you were hiding, weren't you?" pressed gently. "You were behind your door, peeking through a crack. That's a very small space to see through. Maybe you didn't see as much as you think you did." Emma's voice was small but certain. "I saw his hurt eyebrow, and his dark hair, and his shiny watch, and the brown spot on his neck." His confidence flickered for just a moment. Those details were too specific, too consistent. He changed tactics. "Emma, has anyone shown you pictures of my client before today? Your mommy, maybe, or the police lady, or the DA?" "Doctor showed me pictures," Emma said honestly. "Lots of pictures." I pointed to the bad man. "Ah, so people have been showing you pictures and asking you to pick someone out. Emma, do you think maybe, just maybe, you picked that picture because the grown-ups wanted you to pick it? Sometimes kids want to make grown-ups happy, right?" Max's tail thumped once against the cushion, a subtle sign of tension that only Barnes recognized. The dog didn't like the tone was taking. Emma shook her head. "No, I picked him because he's the bad man I saw, the one with the hurt eyebrow." Moved slightly closer and Max's head lifted an inch, not aggressive, just attentive. "Emma, you're 3 years old, you're very young. Do you even remember what you had for breakfast this morning?" "Pancakes," Emma answered immediately. "With syrup and strawberries. Mommy made them special." A few suppressed chuckles rippled through the jury box. Face reddened slightly. "That's not. Let me ask this differently. Emma, you were scared and hiding in the dark. Maybe you're confused about what you saw. Maybe you saw someone who looked a little bit like my client but wasn't actually him." "It was him," Emma insisted, her voice growing firmer. "I saw him. He looked right at me." This was new information, information that hadn't come out in direct examination, pounced on it. "He looked right at you. The intruder saw you watching him." Emma nodded. "His mask was off and he turned around and we looked at each other for a long time. I was really scared." "How long is a long time, Emma? A minute, 2 minutes?" Emma scrunched her face in thought. "I don't know, but I saw him. I remember his face. The hurt eyebrow and everything." Sensed he was losing ground. The more he questioned Emma, the more consistent and credible she became. He needed to shake her to make her seem uncertain, coached, unreliable. "Emma, isn't it true that you want to help your mommy? That you want to tell people what your mommy wants to hear?" Objection was on her feet. Counsel is badgering the witness and implying coaching without foundation. "Sustained," Williams said sharply. "Mr. Rephrase or move on." Took a breath, recalibrating. "Emma, do you understand what happens if you're wrong? If you point to the wrong person, an innocent man could go to jail. That would be very bad, wouldn't it? Emma's eyes began to well with tears, not from confusion, but from the weight of what was suggesting. Her breathing quickened, and her hand gripped Max's fur so tightly the dog shifted closer to her. "But I'm not wrong," Emma said, her voice cracking. "It's him, I know it's him." "How can you be so sure?" pressed, moving even closer to the witness chair. "You're 3 years old, you were terrified, it was night time. You saw someone for just a few seconds through a crack in a door. Emma, isn't it possible, just possible, that you made a mistake?" Max stood up. The movement was fluid and deliberate. One moment the German Shepherd was lying calmly beside Emma. The next he was on all four paws, positioning himself between the little girl and the defense attorney. He didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth, showed no aggression whatsoever, but his body language was unmistakable. He was a shield, a barrier, a living wall protecting Emma from perceived threat. The entire courtroom froze, stopped mid-step, suddenly very aware that he was facing 70 pounds of trained police dog. Barnes started to give a command but hesitated. Max wasn't being aggressive, wasn't violating his training. He was doing exactly what he'd been trained to do, protect a vulnerable person. Emma, tears now streaming down her face, looked from to the defense table where sat the man she'd identified, the man who'd terrorized her family, the man whose face had haunted every nightmare since that terrible night. And in that moment, overwhelmed by questioning, by the pressure of the courtroom, by the weight of justice resting on her tiny shoulders, Emma pointed directly at with a trembling finger. Two words came out of her mouth, words that cut through every legal argument, every clever cross-examination technique, every attempt to discredit her testimony. Words that contained all the terror of that night, all the trauma of the past weeks, all the simple, unshakable truth that only a child could speak. "Bad man." The courtroom erupted into chaos, stumbled backward, his face pale. Several jurors gasped audibly. His face drained of color, his composure finally cracking. Judge Williams gripped his gavel but didn't strike it, even he seemed transfixed by the moment. But the most remarkable thing was what happened next. Max, still standing between Emma, and turned his head toward at the defense table. The dog's dark eyes locked onto the defendant with an intensity that made shrink back in his chair. Max didn't bark, didn't lunge, didn't show his teeth. He simply stood there, his gaze unwavering, his body language communicating something primal and undeniable. "This child is under my protection, and you are the threat." Emma, still crying, still pointing at, wrapped her free arm around Max's neck. The German Shepherd immediately softened, pressing gently back against her, his attention split between comforting Emma and keeping his eyes on the man she'd identified. His tail remained still. This wasn't play or excitement. This was Max doing his job at the highest level, responding to Emma's distress by simultaneously providing comfort and identifying the source of her fear. "Bad man," Emma repeated, her voice stronger now despite the tears. "He broke our window, he scared my mommy, he looked at me with his hurt eyebrow. I remember everything." The power of those words, combined with Max's protective stance, created a tableau that would be seared into the memory of everyone present. This wasn't just testimony, it was truth manifesting in its form, validated by a child's certainty and a dog's instinctive recognition of his human's distress. Judge Williams finally found his voice. "Mr. Step back, now." His tone left no room for argument. Retreated to the defense table, his confidence shattered. "No further questions, Your Honor," he managed, his usual eloquence completely gone. Williams turned to Emma with gentle concern. "Emma, you did so well, you were very brave. Would you like to take a break?" Emma shook her head, wiping her tears with one hand while the other remained wrapped around Max. "I'm okay now. Max is here. I'm safe." Those words, "I'm safe," spoken by a 3-year-old who'd been so profoundly unsafe just weeks ago, broke something open in the courtroom. Several jurors were openly crying now. Sophia had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Even the bailiff looked moved. Approached carefully. "Emma, just one more question. The person you've been calling the bad man, the one you just pointed to, are you absolutely certain that's the person you saw that night when those men broke into your house?" Emma looked at one more time. Max remained standing beside her, his presence giving her the courage to face her nightmare. "Yes," Emma said clearly. "That's him. The bad man with the hurt eyebrow who scared me and Mommy. That's him." "Thank you, Emma. You've been incredibly brave. I have no further questions." Williams looked at any redirect. Shook his head defeated. "No, Your Honor." "Then this witness is excused. Emma, thank you for your courage today. You may step down." As Deputy Barnes helped Emma out of the witness chair, Max stayed close to her side, his protective instincts still fully engaged. The little girl hugged the dog fiercely, whispering "thank you" into his fur. Max's tail finally wagged, a gentle acknowledgement that they'd done it together. The courtroom remained silent as Emma, Sophia, Max, and Barnes exited through the side door. Even after they'd gone, the echo of those two words lingered in the air. Bad man. Simple words from a simple source, but carrying the undeniable weight of truth that no legal maneuvering could diminish. Sat at the defense table, his face in his hands. Robert stared at his notes, knowing his cross-examination had backfired spectacularly. The jury watched them both with expressions that had already moved past deliberation toward conviction. In the hallway outside, Emma clung to her mother while Max pressed against her legs, still providing comfort. Dr. Thornton approached with a soft smile. "You were amazing in there, Emma. So brave." Emma looked up at him with exhausted but clear eyes. "Max helped me. When I was scared, Max showed me it was okay to be brave." Barnes knelt beside them, his hand on Max's head. "That's what partners do, Emma. They help each other be brave." As they walked toward the exit, Emma looked back toward the courtroom one last time. She'd faced the bad man. She'd told the truth. And with Max beside her, she'd found a strength she never knew a 3-year-old could possess. The trial would continue. Closing arguments, jury deliberation, a verdict. But everyone who'd been in that courtroom knew the outcome had been decided in that moment when a little girl pointed at her attacker, and with her canine guardian standing protective watch, spoke two words that changed everything. 3 days had passed since Emma's testimony, and the Sacramento County Courthouse buzzed with anticipation as the jury filed back into Courtroom 7. They deliberated for only 6 hours, a remarkably short time for a criminal trial of this magnitude. Judge Harold Williams took his seat, his expression grave and formal, though those who knew him well could see the slight tension in his shoulders. This verdict would ripple far beyond this single case. Sat at the defense table, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The confident smirk he'd worn during the trial's opening had long since vanished, replaced by barely concealed dread. Beside him, Robert maintained his professional composure, but even he seemed resigned to what was coming. At the prosecution table, District Attorney Laura sat with Detective Sarah Mitchell. Neither woman spoke, both lost in their own thoughts about the extraordinary weeks that had led to this moment. In the gallery, Sophia held Emma on her lap. Judge Williams had made an exception to allow them to be present for the verdict. Emma wore her favorite pink dress and held Mr. Trunk, her stuffed elephant, but her eyes kept scanning the courtroom. "Where's Max?" Emma whispered loudly enough that several people nearby heard her. "Max is working today, sweetheart," Sophia said softly. "He'll come visit us soon, I promise." The jury foreman, a middle-aged man named David, no relation to the defendant, stood when prompted by the judge. He held a piece of paper that represented weeks of investigation, countless hours of legal preparation, and the courage of one very small witness. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Williams asked, following the ancient ritual of American jurisprudence. We have, Your Honor. In the matter of the people of California versus, on the charge of first-degree burglary, how do you find? David's voice rang clear and firm through the courtroom. We find the defendant guilty. On the charge of robbery, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of criminal trespass, how do you find? Guilty. The courtroom erupted. Sophia pressed her face into Emma's hair, tears streaming down her face, and Mitchell embraced briefly, their professionalism momentarily giving way to relief and triumph. At the defense table, his head dropped into his hands and placed a hand on his client's shoulder in a gesture of grim consolation. Judge Williams gavelled for order. The jury's verdict is recorded. Mr. You will be remanded into custody pending sentencing, which I'm scheduling for 6 weeks from today. This court stands adjourned. The gavel fell with finality. As bailiffs led away in handcuffs, he glanced back one final time at the gallery where Emma sat. The little girl met his eyes without flinching, and in that moment seemed to fully comprehend what had happened. He'd been brought down by the testimony of a 3-year-old and the protective instincts of a dog. The irony would follow him to prison. Outside the courtroom, the hallway filled with people, victim advocates, court staff, prosecutors from other cases who'd heard about the unprecedented trial. But Sophia only cared about getting Emma somewhere quiet. They found refuge in the same small conference room where Emma had first bonded with Max weeks earlier. Dr. James Thornton appeared moments later, his face glowing with pride and relief. You did it, Emma. Your bravery helped catch the bad man. Do you understand what that means? Emma nodded solemnly. He can't break any more windows now. That's exactly right. He can't hurt anyone else's family. Thornton knelt beside her. Emma, what you did was extraordinary. You helped change the way courts work. Because of you, other children who witness scary things will be able to have support animals with them too. You're a hero. Emma considered this. Max is the hero. He made me brave. You made each other brave, Thornton said gently. That's what real friendship does. The door opened, and Deputy Barnes entered with Officer Max at his side. The German shepherd's ears perked forward immediately, and his tail began wagging when he spotted Emma. Barnes unclipped the leash, and Max trotted directly to the little girl, who threw her arms around his neck with a squeal of delight. Max, we won. The bad man is going away. Emma buried her face in Max's fur, and the dog nuzzled her gently, his tail wagging with the pure joy of reunion. Barnes smiled at the scene, though his eyes were suspiciously bright. Heard you did great in there, Emma. I'm proud of you. Max is proud of you too. For the next hour, they celebrated quietly in that conference room. Sophia, Emma, Max, Barnes, Thornton, and Mitchell. Someone brought juice boxes for Emma and coffee for the adults. Emma sat on the floor with Max, talking to him about everything and nothing, occasionally feeding him small treats that Barnes had brought specifically for this moment. You know, said to Barnes quietly, we're already getting calls from other counties. Word spread about what happened here. Prosecutors across California are asking about facility dogs for child witnesses. The state bar is talking about establishing formal guidelines. Barnes nodded, his hand resting on Max's head. Max and I will help train other teams if needed. This, he gestured to Emma and Max, this is why we do this work. 6 weeks later, stood before Judge Williams for sentencing. His co-defendant had taken a plea deal and received 8 years, but had rolled the dice with a trial and lost. Williams, known for his measured approach to sentencing, looked at the defendant with unconcealed disappointment. Mister, you terrorized a family in their own home. You traumatized a 3-year-old child who will carry the memory of your actions for the rest of her life. You showed no remorse, and you forced that child to relive her trauma in this courtroom. Williams paused, his voice hardening. However, I also witnessed something remarkable during your trial. I saw courage in its form. I saw a little girl who, despite being terrified, stood up and told the truth. And I saw the power of compassion, embodied by a dog who helped that child find her voice. The judge sentenced to 15 years in state prison, the maximum allowed under the sentencing guidelines. But the story didn't end with a verdict or a sentence. In the months and years that followed, Emma's case became a landmark in California legal history. The state legislature passed the Emma's Law, formerly titled the California Courthouse Facility Dog Act, which established protocols for trained support animals to assist vulnerable witnesses, particularly children, during testimony. Deputy Barnes and Officer Max became trainers for the program, traveling across California to certify new facility dog teams. Max, who'd always been exceptional, became legendary. His photograph hung in the Sacramento courthouse, a permanent reminder of the day he'd helped a little girl change the justice system. Emma continued to visit Max regularly. As she grew older, 4, then 5, then 6, the nightmares became less frequent, the fear less acute. She attended preschool, made friends, learned to read. But she never forgot the night that changed her life, or the German shepherd who'd given her the courage to face her fear. On Emma's 6th birthday, Barnes brought Max to her party. The big German shepherd was older now, a touch of around his muzzle, moving a bit slower than he once had. But when Emma ran to him, Max's tail wagged with the same enthusiasm as always. They posed for a photo together, Emma in her birthday dress, Max sitting proudly beside her, both of them wearing matching party hats. That photograph would later appear in newspapers and legal journals, accompanying articles about courthouse facility dogs and the rights of child witnesses. But for Emma and Max, it was simply a picture of friends, two souls who'd helped each other through the darkest time and come out stronger on the other side. Detective Mitchell kept that photo on her desk. Whenever she interviewed child witnesses in subsequent cases, she'd show them the picture and tell them Emma's story. See this girl? She was 3 years old when she in court. She was scared, but she had a friend who helped her be brave. And because of her courage, bad people went to jail and other children became safer. Dr. Thornton published a groundbreaking paper on the psychological benefits of facility dogs for traumatized witnesses. The research, based partly on Emma's case, showed significant reductions in witness anxiety, improved testimony consistency, and better long-term psychological outcomes. The paper won awards and became required reading in child psychology programs across the country. Sophia, who'd been a single mother working 2 jobs just to survive, became an advocate for crime victims' rights. She spoke at conferences, before legislative committees, and helped other families navigate the criminal justice system. She always brought Emma with her when appropriate, and people marveled at the poised, articulate young girl who spoke about her experience with remarkable clarity. "I was scared," Emma would say at these events, now 7 years old and standing confidently at podiums. "But Max helped me, and now other kids can have friends like Max when they're scared too. That makes me happy." On Emma's 8th birthday, Barnes brought difficult news. Max had been diagnosed with cancer. The veterinarians gave him perhaps 6 months. Barnes was devastated. Max wasn't just his partner, he was family. But when he told Emma, the little girl processed the information with a wisdom beyond her years. "Can I visit him a lot?" she asked, her eyes filling with tears. Before he goes to heaven." Of course, Max would love that. For the next 5 months, Emma visited Max twice a week. She'd sit beside him, reading him stories, telling him about school, thanking him for being her friend when she needed one most. Max would rest his head on her lap, his eyes still bright with intelligence and affection, his tail still managing weak wags when she arrived. On a quiet Tuesday in autumn, with Emma holding his paw and Barnes stroking his head, Officer Max passed away peacefully in the veterinary clinic. Emma cried deep, wrenching sobs of grief for the friend who'd given her so much. But through her tears, she said something that Barnes would never forget. Max lived a hero's life. He saved me. He saved other people too. That's what heroes do. The memorial service for Officer Max drew hundreds. Police officers from across California attended, along with prosecutors, judges, child advocates, and families whose children Max had helped. Emma, now 8 years old, stood at the podium and delivered a eulogy that left no dry eyes in the chapel. "Max was my best friend when I needed one most," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "He didn't just sit next to me in court. He showed me that even when you're really scared, you can still be brave. He showed me that having a friend beside you makes hard things possible. Max was a good dog, the best dog, and I'll never forget him." They buried Max with full honors at the California Animal Memorial Park, his grave marker reading, "Officer Max K. 9412 Hero, Protector, Friend. He helped the smallest voice be heard." But Max's legacy lived on. The facility dog program he'd helped pioneer expanded across California and then nationwide. Hundreds of children with comfort dogs beside them, finding courage they didn't know they possessed. Research papers cited Emma's case. Law schools taught about it. The story of the 3-year-old girl and the German shepherd who protected her became the stuff of legal legend. Years later, when Emma graduated from high school as valedictorian, she announced her plans to attend law school. "I want to be a prosecutor," she told reporters who still remembered her story. "I want to help people who feel powerless find their voice, the way people helped me find mine. And I want to make sure that children who witness terrible things get the support they need." In her dorm room at Berkeley, Emma kept a framed photograph of herself at age 3, sitting in the witness chair with her hand on Max's back. Beside it was the photo from her 6th birthday, her and Max wearing party hats, both of them grinning. These weren't just memories. They were reminders of where she'd been and why she'd chosen the path ahead. The night before her first day of law school, Emma dreamed of Max. In the dream, they were back in that courthouse, but she wasn't scared anymore. Max stood beside her, tail wagging, and somehow she understood what he was communicating. "You're ready now. You're strong enough. Go help others the way you were helped." She woke with tears on her face, but a smile on her lips. Emma, once the smallest, most vulnerable witness in Sacramento's history, had become exactly what Max had always seen in her. Someone capable of extraordinary bravery, someone who would use her trauma to create change. Someone who understood that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And somewhere, in whatever place good dogs go when their work on earth is done, Officer Max's tail was wagging.